Hello, everyone. My name is Julian Gau, and I'm the music director of the Horizon Ensemble. Today, we have with me Andrés Ballesteros. How are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good, enjoying a Friday evening. Andrés is a guest composer on our upcoming concert, Freedom, happening on Sunday, October 6th at 3 p.m. at the Church of the Covenant on Newbury Street in Boston. This is Andres. He's super cool. He's a violinist, clarinetist, and composer, as well as the community director for the opera company Whitesnake Projects. Now, Andres' piece, Shaheed, is being performed by the Horizon Ensemble on our upcoming concert. And I'd love to ask you about what your inspiration is. What's the story behind this piece?
Yeah, so this is a piece that I wrote quite a while ago, I think 2012 or so, something like that. So a dozen years ago. I was in college at the time of 2011, of course, because it's based on the Arab Spring. I was in college at the time, and my minor was in government, and I was also studying Arabic. So I was watching these events unfold in real time, in large part through the eyes of my teachers, who had a lot of family there, who had a lot of connections to those places, as I'm learning about this kind of process of societal reinvention in some of my other classes. And it was something that really struck me, like how full of potential this moment was, this kind of revolutionary democratic potential. And this piece came out of the energy of that moment, trying to capture some of what that is that I was feeling and seeing. In that sense, it is an old piece. I don't think that optimism has sustained itself in the real world after the Arab Spring, but it is very much a picture of that moment.
Yeah, well, you wrote this piece about over a dozen years ago. And first, I'll ask, looking back on history and, where we were as people and as a society, in 2012 versus today, how do you think the piece reflects differently, today as opposed to back then?
So in the piece, kind of musically, what happens is after this initial spurt of energy, the orchestra breaks up into these several different groups, and they spend most of the piece trying to figure out if there's a way to put themselves back together into something harmonious where they're all working in the same key or kind of towards the same goal. So most of the piece is spent trying to struggle for that, and I think at the end it resolves neatly. I think in the past 12 or 13 years, I as a person have seen that it definitely does not always resolve so neatly. I remain optimistic about what's possible, but I think tempered with seeing what has happened. You look at all of the countries that experienced the Arab Spring, that underwent those revolutions, and many of them can't necessarily say that they are better off than they were before the revolutions.
But in music, we can dream. And I think this piece represents that. And still, even though things changed since back then, I think still a hope for the future. Now, musically, also, you've changed in the last dozen or so years. If I'm correct, originally the piece was for just 9 string players, and now it's expanded for full string orchestra. I'm curious what your experience is as a composer, changing this piece for Horizon to perform it now. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yes. So the curious thing is I did think it was originally going to be for 9 strings, and the first group that played it did end up having more than the 9 strings. So even in that moment, there was a moment of like, oh, this is not quite what I expected, but I'm happy about it. Yes, I hope I have grown musically a lot in the past 13 years. And when we were talking about this piece, I was very excited to have this piece performed again. And then I said, I would love to have a chance to spend some time with it, give it a little bit of love. And because I think I tried to leave as much of the original intact as I could and really just focus on technical things. There's perhaps something to be said about like writing this piece. A younger me writing this piece was really focused on kind of the music of it in this expression of humanity. And I was not thinking yet necessarily that carefully about the humans who were actually going to be playing this piece. And kind of the technicality and the physicality of moving on their instruments. And now that's something that I think very deeply about a lot of the time, like the people that I'm writing music for. And that's the kind of revisions that I was focused on when I was making some tweaks.
Cool, cool. And I know you're a violinist, so you were able to do some of it yourself. I remember, when we were messaging about this piece, he said something like, "Oh, I'm going to try some of these out on my own fiddle." I was like, "Oh, nice. It's good when composers writing for strings play strings, so hooray." Now, as composers, we're inspired by, composers we study and composers we like. I'm curious if there are any composers in particular who you were inspired by to write this piece, anyone that you learned from or studied during the process.
I honestly couldn't really say what exactly I was thinking 13 years ago. This was like in college was the first time I was really academically studying composition and really grappling with a lot of the composers that you don't hear about just on the street. So like, of course, we've all heard of the Beethovens and the Mozarts and the whoever's, but college was really the first time I was being exposed to a lot of the more experimental stuff happening in the 20th and 21st centuries. It's not something that I saw a lot in my earlier education. So I don't remember because there were so many different composers that I was learning about from my professors at the time.
But what I'm getting is that in general, kind of the exposure to more modern compositional techniques and more, harmonically adventurous and wild things perhaps made their way into the piece. Something like that, maybe?
Yeah, something like that, which speaks again to the growth as an artist, because this is a piece that was way out there for me at the time. And now I look back on it, I'm like, this is really sweet. And I like this piece, and it's very tame. In a way that I really like, but in a way that I think still fits within the range of my artistic voice, but it's a much larger range now.
Cool. Yeah, the last piece of yours I saw was last year during White Snake Project's production Monkey. There were the two songs at the start that were really quite different styles from this. For reference, one of them was more hip hop like, and one of them was more like, singer-songwriter, like musical theater almost ish, something like that, right?
Yeah, it was vaguely ballady, maybe musical theater. The girl who wrote the lyrics, the high school girl who wrote the lyrics, really liked R&B, and she liked these R&B ballads, but wanted to also be like indie songwritery. So that's the style she directed me to write.
Nice. So we have a composer here who writes not only, string orchestra stuff in the very classical style, but also other cool things like R&B-ish stuff or hip-hop-ish stuff. So he's Andrés. He's cool. Now I'm curious, as this piece fits into the program, we have Mariana Martinez, her symphony, possibly the first symphony by a woman. We have your piece. We have Seper's piece, which was sort of a response to yours a little bit. I don't know if you know that. Seper Parasta, who we'll also interview virtually at some point later, he wrote his piece La Letzar, tulip field, as representing a field of tulips who represent love and sacrifice and martyrdom. And now the title Shaheed. What does the title mean?
So Shaheed, the most common translation is martyr, which is true, both in a religious sense and in a non-religious sense, as it is in English. It also means witness. So Arabic is composed, like other Semitic languages, is composed of roots, most of which are 3 letters. So here the letters are shin, ha, and dad, so shahada. So if you can then manipulate those to mean different things. So Yushahid is I see or I watch. So witness, Shaheed is someone who has seen a thing. And in this case, someone who is a martyr for the cause that they have attested to or they have seen. Because the Arab Spring was started by Mohammed Bouazizi, who self-immolated very dramatically to spark the entire thing.
Wow, yeah. And so it's great to have your piece in the program, because then Seper, who is from Iran, thinks about the state of that country in the modern day a lot in his compositions. And you're playing on his piece, actually, too. Andrés is also a violinist in Horizon who's played several shows with us. So I hope you're having fun with that. And then we'll finish with Brahms 3. So the whole theme is freedom. Catch it soon. Now, is there anything you want our audience to, get out of this piece? What are you hoping that they'll take away from it? Anything that you have in mind?
Yeah, I really appreciate that you're bringing up Seper's piece as well. First of all, because it's really cool and you should come hear it. And it's really fun to play. But I I think, like, yes, there was this optimism that I had in my piece, and now it's kind of in there. The Arab Spring was followed by an Arab Winter, and yet, if we look back at history, without these kinds of revolutions, without these kinds of moments, we maybe have nothing. So Saper's piece is, I think, a little more connected to the Mahsa Amini protests. Is that correct? Right. So the more recent protests, and you do see some degrees of change in Iran these days. There's a lot of movement there on the political front that Saper could speak to with much more detail about. But we need this spark, this fire towards freedom, and I hope that in this election year we keep that spark within us as we're listening to this music that is about freedom and that artistic movement towards it.
That's so beautifully articulated. Thank you. And I didn't know you were a government major too. I mean, or minor. That's really cool. Yeah, I'm really excited for this concert. Is there anything that you want to say to the Horizon fans out there?
Come to this concert. You don't want to miss it. It's going to be a great time. And come to the next one. They are all wonderful. When I don't get the chance to play, I make sure I'm in the audience.
Thank you. Yeah. So come see us. It's on Sunday, October 6th at 3 p.m. at the Church of the Covenant on 67 Newbury Street. Admission is free with a suggested donation of $20. And I hope to see you there. Yeah. Anything you else want to say for whoever's watching?
See you there.
Hooray! Thank you. See you later.